Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob, and in today's video we're going to be talking about running high-level games. Now this one's going to be more for Dungeon Masters. I've done a lot of player videos lately and I really wanted to do something for Dungeon Masters. And it stuns me how often I will see people on the internet or even talk to people in real life who say that they've been playing for D&D for 15 or 20 years or even longer, and they've never had a character get past 20th level or to 20th level. And that kind of stuns me because I've had multiple campaigns I've run where we've gotten to, say, 18th or 20th level, and back in, first and second edition when there really was no level limit, we had characters that were in the 30s. And so I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit, mostly from a DM perspective, and talk about how to run those kind of games, because I do see a lot of dungeon masters who are afraid of high-level play or talk about how difficult it is to challenge the players and things like that. And they're not wrong. High-level players have so many abilities and so many options at their disposal that even one high-level player can realistically reshape a lot of the game world. And if you have a team of 4 or 5 or 6 player characters all working together, all like 18th, 19th, 20th level, there's very little they can't do to affect the game world. And so how do you challenge that type of group? That's going to be what we're going to talk about in today's video. We're going to talk a little bit about structuring campaigns, as well as things to make the game challenging for your players and engage the players. Now, I've often heard people refer to D&D as being either a Star Wars game or a Star Trek game, meaning that it's either episodic, like Star Trek, where, they just kind of cruise around the galaxy, having one adventure after another. The adventures aren't necessarily linked, but it's the same crew, with the same personalities generally doing the, whatever the mission of the week happens to be. Versus Star Wars, which is more of a structured story where you see Luke as a simple farm boy complaining that he wants to play with his friends and that all of his buddies have all gone away and, there's nothing for him here on this crap little planet anymore. We watch him join the rebellion, destroy the Death Star, become a Jedi, and eventually become a full-fledged Jedi Knight who defies the Emperor and helps redeem Darth Vader, the most, evil person according to everybody else, who is irredeemable. Even Yoda thought that he was a lost cause. And Luke proves them all wrong. And I think that you can sort of have stories that are both as well. It doesn't have to be 100% one or the other. Like, one of my favorite shows of all time is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And Buffy really had elements of both. You have a lot of episodic adventures, which are sort of like Monster of the Week and filler type stuff, but each season had its big bad villain for that season, and all the seasons were linked together by kind of an overall story as well. And that's generally how most of my long-term campaigns play out. I'll have an overarching idea that I want to do, and I'll fill a lot of the gaps with my Monster of the Week or Mission of the Week type scenarios. So I think you need to think along in those terms. And if you're not doing like a one-shot where the players just start at like 18th or 20th level or whatever, but you're doing a campaign all the way from ground zero, like right at level 1 all the way through, then have kind of an overarching idea. And just remember, you're going to break things down into the general tiers of play. In the current campaign that we've basically wrapped up, we still need like one session to like really finish things off, but we're going to be missing one of the players for a while. So we decided to hold off and do the big finale when he's able to play again, because it's not really fair to play for 3 years and then do one game without him and have it all finished. But in that one, the players started at level 1. At one point they were literally killing rats in a sewer, and then it turned out there were were-rats involved. And the players have had, their city was under siege, and they were just doing like a lot of fetch quests because they were still low level. Eventually they were traveling to other planes. They helped liberate this one realm from this vampire king called the Red King. And lately they've been fighting like ridiculous threats, right? Because now they're all at like 18th, 19th, 20th level. And in order to structure that, I've kind of had to know this is going to be Act 1, where the players are at this level range. This is going to be Act 2, the players are in this level range. This is going to be Act 3, the players in this level range. And this is finally going to be basically Act 4, which is, the epic tiers of play. And just know going ahead, these are going to be kind of how things are going to work out. I do think that a lot of times as dungeon masters, we overthink things. We think that it's, we have to throw harder and harder monsters at the players in order to challenge them and stuff. And that's really not the way to do it. High-level players are going to be able to win basically any combat encounter almost. Like the number of times that my players have simply done something like drop a force cage on the main big bad and then proceed to wipe out most of his minions. And even if the big bad has things like plane shift available so they can escape the force cage, they have to cast a spell, they're going to have to make a saving throw, they're going to have to be able to come back again. It's going to take them out of the combat for a couple rounds, during which time the players are going to be able to mop up most of the minions and really kind of change the dynamic of the fight. That kind of stuff happens all the time. But I already know that going in. My players are probably going to do something like this. And that's just the way it is. I don't want to cripple their abilities or take away from their powers. So one thing I think is very important is to have several minions, and especially minions that aren't just like super weak themselves, but are maybe, if the players are fighting a CR 20 creature, then maybe have some CR like 8 and 9 creatures with them that can cast things like Counterspell. Because now it's going to challenge the players where they might not be able to get that force cage off, or they're going to have to use their own reactions to counterspell somebody else's counterspell. The wizard tries to cast force cage, enemy player tries to counterspell it, the bard has to counterspell that guy, somebody else tries to counterspell the bard, and now the sorcerer has to counterspell that guy, and the wizard's force cage finally manages to get through. And it's just like this stack of counterspells all trying to prevent things. But meanwhile, now all the players that have counterspell available have used their reaction. That means they can't counterspell the enemy's spells. The enemy might also have force cage, and they can slam the barbarian in there. And suddenly now the players are like, well, crap, our biggest fighter type guy might have just been neutralized. So don't be afraid to have the enemies use the players' own similar tactics against them. Also, don't be intimidated by the fact that they're high level. Think of, well, I'm going to refer to the comic book world, because I'm a big comic book fan, or at least I used to be back in the day. Groups like the Avengers, the Justice League or Justice Society of America, either one of those teams, the Legion of Superheroes at different points, and the old school Defenders, back when they had the Silver Surfer, the Hulk, Doctor Strange, and the Submariner all on the same team, all at the same time. And then they had a bunch of other throwaway characters too, or lesser powered guys. But when the Submariner is your number 4 guy on the team, that kind of puts things in perspective of just how good that team was for a while. But yet, how long has the Justice League been around? How long have the Avengers been around? These are incredibly powerful teams, but they also fight incredibly powerful things. And it's not always about challenging that character. Don't be afraid to challenge the player who's playing that character. For example, one of Superman's greatest villains is Lex Luthor. And Lex Luthor can't really compete with Superman in the same way that Darkseid or Doomsday can. He has to use his brains. And so what does he do? Well, a lot of times he'll have other things that have to occupy Superman's time. Like maybe he'll capture Lois Lane, and so Superman doesn't have to just defeat Luthor. He has to be able to save Lois in the process. Now things are a lot more complicated. What if your players have to save the villagers from being sacrificed? They don't have to just win the combat. While they're trying to fight their way through all the minions, the evil priest starts murdering villagers, and each villager allows him to gain in power and maybe summon some sort of dark being, or maybe just gain more power for himself. And the players realize the longer this goes on, not only are more villagers going to die, but the fight's going to become that much more difficult. I actually did something similar in the current campaign that I'm running, where the players had to do that exact same thing. A bunch of villagers from NPC's village they'd met had been captured. Them and these 2 NPCs had to try to save the villagers, and the villagers began getting sacrificed. the players started noticing that there's something weird going on, and this big giant demon worm god thing was trying to be summoned. The players managed to eventually stop it and prevented the ritual from being completed, but had they not, things would have gotten really, really, really ugly. This kind of puts a time constraint on the players and gives them other things to worry about besides just rolling more dice. I kind of like this kind of thing. I think Superman and characters like that are a great example of how to think about dealing with high-level players. You could sure you can throw things like Doomsday at them every week, but that's going to get very boring and repetitious. Think of how to challenge the player behind the character, not just how to throw things with more hit points or better armor class or more attacks. There's a time and place for that, and I'm not saying don't use combat counters and counters at all, but a lot of times the best challenges for players are the personal challenges that the player themselves has to start making like moral and ethical decisions about. Also, don't be afraid to let the players be powerful. They, especially if they started at level 1 and now they're level 20, they've had to go through a lot to get there. They've earned the chance to do powerful things, to be powerful people. And don't just be afraid to let them embrace that. Maybe the player wants to take over his own kingdom. That could be a worthy goal, and now that'll give you an opportunity to figure out, well, who's here already? What powerful enemies might there be? Is another enemy wizard who has this tower and rules from there with an iron fist, or maybe some sort of lich or undead or something like that? Whatever. That can be an interesting adventure. Maybe you have a high-level cleric who decides that he wants to, spread his own religion. Or maybe he wants to actually, become a deity himself in some way. These kind of things can make epic quests for players where the whole party might have to, work together in order to achieve different things. So, let the players feel powerful, give them epic stories and epic level challenges, and it'll be a very memorable campaign. They can kill goblins and orcs anytime, but if one player finds the Wand of Orcus, and then the players decide that they're going to take it upon themselves to destroy the wand, and have numerous encounters now on the way with Orcus and his minions and various demons, hunting them, trying to get the wand back when they realize that the players aren't just going to use it for their own personal gain, but are going to try to permanently destroy the Wand of Orcus. Now the players have a personal enemy who actually hates them and wants it back. This was actually one of my favorite characters I ever played back in the day when we were in 1st and 2nd edition. I had a wizard, or magic user as we call it back then, who did this exact same thing. She actually used to be evil, but she got cursed and had her alignment changed. And I remember back then being kind of a power gamer because I was very young. And the DM, I was asking him, well, how could I get her to turn evil again? And he's like, well, why would she want to? I mean, she probably feels really bad about all the terrible things she's done in her life and wants to, atone or whatever. And that was the first time I started thinking about this person as their own distinct character. Not what did I want her to have to make her more powerful, but what did she as a person want for herself? And the idea of this big redemptive quest really appealed to me. And this was one of the most epic things we ever did in Dungeons & Dragons. And I had a personal rivalry with one of those powerful demon princes there was. And we eventually did succeed. This was a very high-level campaign. These were the exact characters I mentioned when I said we were all in our mid-30s. And we destroyed the Wand of Orcus and ended up destroying Orcus. Although not on his home plane, unfortunately. But still, it was pretty epic. So those are the kind of things that players are going to be remembering and talking about years and years and years from now. They're not going to remember the time when they fought a bunch of orcs for the 47th time in their D&D careers. But they will always remember the time that they decided to destroy the Wand of Orcus, or whatever it might happen to be. Another good way, I think, of challenging the players is, I kind of touched on this briefly before, but things like time constraints. It's not necessarily enough to just have the players run through a high-level dungeon with tons of high-level monsters. And the reason is because high-level players have access to things like Lehman's Tiny Hut, Mordenkainen's Magnificent Mansion, whatever. In other words, they can take lots of rests. If they're on a time constraint, then suddenly things become a lot more difficult for them. Maybe they have to be able to do all this stuff in order to prevent the stars from aligning and, Cthulhu from entering this realm, or whatever the problem is, That was kind of one of the things I did in the King in Yellow campaign, where the third act, they were kind of against the clock because the enemies were trying to perform this ritual to summon the King in Yellow, and the players had to be able to stop that. This doesn't just make things a little more tense, it also makes it a lot more difficult. Your players might have 9th level spell slots, they might have access to things like Wish, but they've only got one 9th level spell slot available per day. And if they can't just take long rests whenever they feel like it, they've only got that one Wish spell. So they have to be able to complete this scenario. They have to start budgeting all these high-level spells. They can't just be throwing down force cages in every single combat because they're going to run out of high-level spell slots. And if they know that they're on a time constraint, that this not only amps up the tension, but it also adds that extra level of challenge and difficulty because they can't just take safe long rests infinite number of times through the dungeon. They can't just teleport home if they don't feel the dungeon's safe, take a long rest, teleport back again, and continue the dungeon, which we have done before in different games. So I like those kind of ideas. I like the idea of building epic stories for those players. Now, a D&D channel I don't watch as much as I should is called Taking 20, and he had a question from a player who was talking about, or maybe it was Dungeon Master, I can't remember which, but he said that he had a high-level thief and a high-level wizard, and they were trying to think, he was trying to come up with good stories to challenge these players. And he gave a few suggestions that I really liked, and one of them was building like personal rivalries. And I kind of mentioned that with my character with Orcus earlier, but one thing he suggested, the thief was actually an assassin. And he actually suggested the idea that maybe there was somebody who was trying to undo that assassin's legacy, who would sometimes go around and start resurrecting the people that the assassin had killed in order to undo his work. Now, I actually really like that idea, and I want to take it a different direction than he did, but I think that if the players start figuring this stuff out and start finding out that a lot of the people they killed have been resurrected, and now, whoever hired them is getting kind of angry, like they feel cheated. I hired you to kill this person for me, and now they're still alive. Like, what happened? This can not only be an interesting mystery for the players to solve, but can also lead to a strong rivalry if the players find out that somebody is doing this specifically to target them, specifically to attack their legacy. Because the players might not be thinking in terms of establishing a legacy. But that's what high-level characters are doing, whether they want to or not. And the fact that the villain, the guy who's resurrecting people and bringing them back to life in this case, is the villain. But in this case, if the villain actually brags about it when they have their big confrontation, that, I've done this to destroy your legacy. I've done this to undo all the things that you've worked for and accomplished. And I've turned, the people who used to hire you against you, and I've ruined your reputation. This can cause the players to start thinking like, hey, yeah, maybe I do want to have a legacy. Maybe my reputation actually matters to me. Maybe the things I've done aren't just, murder, hobo, or whatever type activities. Maybe I've been building to something, even if I haven't realized it. And the NPC pointing out that they've done all this in order to tear that down can suddenly cause a very personal reaction in the players, which is what you really want in this kind of scenario. So I thought that his video dealing with this was actually very good. I can't remember the name of the video. I'll try to find it and link it in the description, because I want to, I don't think it's fair to talk so much about his content and not to link the video as well. But that was kind of my take on his idea. As far as combat, because a lot of the ideas I've suggested so far aren't necessarily combat related, but I think that it's Dungeons and Dragons. Players are going to have a combat. That's just the way it's going to be. Don't just throw high-level monsters at them. And when you do, don't be afraid to give those monsters servants and minions and whatnot. One high-level dragon, even in its lair, with all of its lair abilities and its legendary abilities and everything like that, is way less threatening to the party than one dragon with a brood of children. And now the players have to start dealing with maybe 5 or 6 like drakes or young dragons in addition to the one big main dragon. Now you've got a bunch of different breath weapons, and suddenly this combat has become very, very, very dangerous. I mentioned before about having minions that can cast spells, especially counterspell. A lot of people on different channels make a big deal about how powerful high-level spells are for player characters. And again, they're not wrong about this. But there's no reason the enemies can't have access to a lot of these same spells too. If you have your big main villain and he has lots of high-level spells, or maybe he's a fighter type, but he has his wizard guy who like works for him or whatever, and that person has high-level spells. But then they have minions who have maybe 3rd and 4th level spells only, and they're pretty easy to deal with. To play, you know, a couple of like well-placed AoEs, or the fighter just going to town on them for like one round of combat might be able to cleave through 1 or 2 of them in a round. But they have things like counterspell, they have things like the spell magic, and that automatically makes things way more challenging for the players. No matter how powerful that 20th level wizard is, he still only has 1 reaction for a counterspell. And, you know, that can instantly change the dynamics of a fight. If he doesn't have counterspell available when one of the minions decides to cast a hypnotic pattern on 3 or 4 of the players, you know, these kind of things, even if the players make their saving throws, the thing is that tension just keeps getting amped up, and the players start realizing like, oh hey, we need to start dealing with these guys. That's not just enough to tunnel down the boss. We need to be able to take out all this other stuff, because this is the thing that's really messing with us right now. I had one scenario where the players were trying to actually fight. Basically, I just reskinned this one Archdevil from the Creature Codex, and the players were trying to deal with him, but some of his like acolytes and priests, because he was kind of like a demigod type creature, but they were trying to heal him in combat. So the players were doing ridiculous amounts of damage to him, but he also had a ton of hit points. But then all the little minions that they've been trying to ignore suddenly start trying to cast Cure Wounds on him and healing on him. Suddenly the players are like, oh man, like, we got to start dealing with this. You can't just keep counterspelling them over and over again, because we actually need to counterspell him so he doesn't try to force cage the barbarian again like he tried last round, you know? He might have legendary action where he can use one of his spells. This can be very powerful as well, because the players might have budgeted for 1 counterspell, but if he has a legendary action allowing him to say maybe he can only use one of his 7th level or lower spells, that still gives him some very powerful spells, including Force Cage or Wall of Force or other things like this, where he can try trapping different players and cutting them off from the rest of the group. And if you can do it as a legendary action, they might not have budgeted for that. They might not have realized, oh, we needed 2 guys to save our reactions for this. And again, that can make the fight a lot more challenging and a lot more interesting. I like having villains that try to teleport away, because usually I don't want them to succeed, to be honest. Usually, if I've had the big climatic battle with the party, I kind of want it to be resolved. I don't necessarily want the villain to escape, but I'm also prepared to let the villain escape if the players aren't able to stop him. And I think that you have to be able to adjust to that kind of stuff, you know? So if he starts casting teleport and the players are like, oh no, we need to stop this, it automatically just raises that tension again. And one of the things about having a good fight isn't just throwing, you know, you can have a fight where the players fight something that does a lot of damage with a lot of armor class and a lot of hit points. But if all it is just rolling dice and subtracting hit points, the fight can be extremely dull and boring. But if you have these other types of elements that can kind of add to the tension, the fight can be very, very good. Mind controlling different players. One of the greatest battles we had in my White Spire campaign was against this one villain who's been kind of behind the scenes. She's like this evil, chaotic, evil demon queen, and she's like this. She plays the long game. She doesn't like to destroy things. She likes to like corrupt societies and watch them destroy themselves from within, and that's kind of the way she's been operating. And the players have found like different statues and monuments from all these ancient civilizations and different continents of the world they've been to, even in a couple of the other worlds they've been to. And a lot of them were like basically destroyed, but at one point they saw like wall murals of her, and one was like of this king with this crown, and she was in the back and behind them. It was actually the first time they ever saw her. It was in a mural in this temple. And that was just kind of the way she plays things. She doesn't necessarily want to be in the front. She likes to control other people and just poison and corrupt them, that Grima Wormtongue type, except way hotter, of course, and with high-level spells. And when they finally did confront her, the battle was actually really epic. She ended up managing to charm one of the players, and she could only charm one player at a time, but basically she was able to mind control the arcane archer, and he killed the wizard. It was the first player death in the campaign, and at this point the players were already like 18th level, so they were able to bring the wizard back to life. They have 101 different ways of doing that kind of stuff, from wish to resurrection to whatever, you know, revivify even, right? So that wasn't really a big deal. But just the fact that she was able to control him, and then all of a sudden he decides, the player, really, you could tell he was really relishing this, because the guy named Mike decided to action surge when mind controlled and killed the wizard. And, you know, so that was fun. So these kind of things just automatically add a lot more tension to the combat, and even if the outcome is a foregone conclusion, the players are going to win. And remember, I generally, you know, I kind of want the players to win, right? So like, I'm not doing this to just humiliate the players and kill their characters week after week. Because if I am, they're going to get really sick and tired of that, and they're not going to want to play. My objective is to challenge them so that we have great stories. And if sometimes they fail and they all die and we have a party wipe, it has happened, and that kind of sucks. But that's kind of its own epic story in a way later, you know, that you can always talk about. But the best stories are the ones where the players triumph over ridiculous odds and get to be heroic and feel heroic. Another way to cause fear and to kind of amp those stakes up is to focus on one player. Now, I really like this with the rivalry type idea. We did Curse of Ravenloft at one point, or Strahd, or whatever, sorry, whatever the... Curse of Strahd, there it is, on my bookshelf. And one of the players, I tried to make it as challenging for him as I could, but he actually ended up seducing Strahd's would-be girlfriend there. And so when they fought Strahd literally just concentrated all his attacks on that player character, trying to kill him. And the rest of Strahd's minions and all of his vampire brides and whatnot focused on the rest of the party. But literally every single action Strahd did was aimed at killing that player. You know, because he, you know, mowed another man's lawn, so to speak. And, you know, Strahd wasn't having any of that. But you can do that with a lot of different things. Like, if you have rivalries that are built in, then it's natural for that NPC who has the rivalry to just try to focus on that player, while everybody, all the other NPCs, all the other villains, are trying to deal with the party in general. And then let the party have their thing, and let that player have his big showdown with his nemesis. Because that's just kind of cool and epic to begin with. But it's also a lot more engaging for the player when they know that, like, this is kind of their big moment. Like, I'm up against the guy who's been personally trying to screw me over, who's been following me around, resurrecting all the people I've been assassinating. What a douchebag. You know? Now you finally get to confront the guy, and you get to deal with it. And that's, you know, that's your big moment, right? So I really like those kind of aspects. As far as big epic rivalries are concerned, when you're talking like 18th to 20th level players or characters, things like demon lords and archdevils and even gods aren't outside the realm of possibility. You know, if you look at like the Dragonlance books, like especially the second series with the Test of the Twins and all that, Raistlin decides to travel back in time, become the most powerful wizard ever by basically becoming the guy literally and stealing all of his power and his soul and everything else, and then going into Takhisis's own realm and trying to destroy her in order to become a god. You know, lots of like mythology and lore is about people trying to fight the gods, or the gods becoming jealous of mortals for their beauty or their brains or their strength or whatever, and having that kind of personal rivalry with them. And that kind of thing really just doesn't work at low levels, you know? I mean, even if the players do succeed, it's just unrealistic that a bunch of level 6 guys were taking down a god. It just doesn't really work on a storytelling level. But for high level characters, why not? They're basically gods already, almost. And to go back to some of those superhero teams I've talked about in the past, or earlier in the video, you look at Thor. Thor is a Norse god, you know? Can you really say that Superman isn't on that kind of level? He's fought gods in the comic books before. Wonder Woman has fought gods and goddesses in the comics before. Like, those kind of level of characters are already kind of on that level. Now, having some sort of rivalry established with them, I really like the idea of kind of like building up to something like that, and you know, maybe they never have to actually confront the god themselves. Maybe it's like I mentioned with the Cthulhu thing, where they have to fight like his high priest and prevent him from entering this realm. And then you just kind of tell the players, you know, if Cthulhu comes, the game ends, right? That's kind of the end of things. Cthulhu destroys everything, and you know, the world is ruined. You have to stop him from getting here, you know. And if the high priest and the cult are sufficiently powerful, that can be a big epic fight. But if your characters are at that point, maybe Cthulhu is not beyond them. Maybe they can invade the city of like Relay and or however it's pronounced. I have no idea. Lovecraft had awesome names, so like I've given that. But you know, maybe that's the kind of thing you might want to do at the end of a high-level campaign. That could be an epic adventure, going into his city and then like finding and confronting him as he like awakens or whatever, you know, fighting like the god of death or something. Like, I think a great idea for an adventure would be if like a high-level character dies and their soul is like stolen by like some sort of death god or whatever, right, as a prize or trophy. And now the players can't just resurrect that character. They have to like invade that god's realm and get the soul back. I think that would be just an epic mission. Maybe it's an NPC that they really like, that they're really close to, because that way the player won't be out of the action and all the party will be involved. But you know, that's the kind of thing I think about when I talk about challenging high-level players. It's not just about throwing bigger encounters with more minions and more enemies and more hit points and a higher armor class or whatever at the players. And like, the best thing about high-level play is just how epic the odds and the stakes can be. You know, you can have players that try to carve out their own miniature realm. I played a game called Amber, based on Roger Zelazny's Chronicles of Amber. And in that game, basically Amber's like the true like origin of the universe. Technically it's not, it's the first shadow, but from Amber, all these other shadows are cast, including our Earth, and the main characters have gained this ability to like walk through these different shadows. They can come to our Earth, they can go to any Earth, and basically if they walk far enough through shadow, they can find almost anything they're looking for, as long as they know what they're looking for, they look hard enough. The characters are essentially gods who are immortal, and like I've had like the one guy Benedict, who's considered to be the greatest swordsman and strategist of all time, because he's spent literally eons just studying every aspect of warfare and war strategy that he possibly can. And even all the other Amberites, all these other godlike characters, like, yeah, like, you do not want to mess with him because he will just kill you. Like, nobody's going to be able to beat this guy, because that has been the only thing he's really been concerned with for millennia, you know? And all the different characters are like that. They all have those like ridiculous levels of power. And the player characters, while being a great step down from that, all still have these similar kind of abilities where you can walk through shadow, you can find things. And one of the things that was interesting is that players could start with their own like realms of existence. That like they'd walk through shadow, found some shadow, and made it theirs. And it cost them a bunch of their character creation points. But you could start as being the ruler of your own dimension, you know, as a starting point. So don't be afraid to have something like that for your characters as an endpoint. Like, why not? Why couldn't some 20th level wizard decide, I want to have my own demi-plane, and not just the spell demi-plane. I want my own realm of existence. Sorry, I'm starting to lose my voice from talking here too much. But anyways, this is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Why is the cleric just a minion of the god at 20th level? Why not become one of his like demigods in his service or something and ascend to godhood yourself? You know, there's so many cool ideas for high level characters, and you just have to be not afraid to embrace these type of things. The final thing I really want to say before I wrap up this video is that high level characters can accomplish pretty much anything. And if the players are just considered or just concerned with being murder hobos, even at 20th level, I think the campaigns can be very disappointing in a lot of ways. Ultimately, I want to inspire my players to have their characters leave some kind of legacy, some kind of lasting impact in the game world, where after the campaign is done and these characters are retired, they're going to look back on it and think, man, like my character had a rivalry with Orcus and I destroyed the wand of Orcus and killed him, you know? Or they're going to say, we like fought the King in Yellow and saved the universe from destruction. Or, you know, those are the kind of things that the players in 10 or 15 or 20 years from now will still be talking about. Like, man, remember that group. Remember how good they were, and how powerful we were, and all the crazy things we did. We fought this and this and this. Like I said, nobody cares about killing an orc or a goblin for the 100th time. We've all done that in countless Dungeons and Dragons games before. But how often are you going to have a chance to have a personal rivalry with like the Demogorgon or something like that? Like, embrace that kind of idea and you will have a campaign that you will never forget and the players will always, always talk about forever. So that's my closing thoughts. Hopefully you liked the video. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe, leave comments in the comment section, ring the bell, all that kind of stuff. But most importantly, if you've had your own high-level campaigns and if you've had these kind of experiences, please leave comments in the comment section. I love reading people's comments about these kind of things. If you have just your own thoughts and insights on it, then do so. If you have questions about it, and you're like, you know what, I really liked your video, but the idea of having a bunch of level 20 characters running around in my world still kind of scares me. What do you think I should do about it? Leave me your questions. I would love to talk to you about this kind of stuff. Anyways, that's everything for now. I'm losing my voice, so it's a good time to stop the video. And I'll see you next time. Thanks.